Hey, Bomb Squad. If you're a comedian or a podcaster looking for an affordable website solution with a modern look, then we recommend Puck's Hub. With a Puck's Hub website, you can set up your new website in minutes with easy-to-use pre-built templates. Puck's Hub websites are customizable and can easily be integrated with other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The best part? Puck's Hub plans are only $5 per month. We use Puck's Hub for our website at the Art of Bombing podcast, and we think you should too. That's why we've partnered with Puck's Hub to offer listeners a free 60-day trial. Head over to puckshub.com to subscribe and use promo code AOBPOD at checkout for your 60-day free trial, and then pay only $5 per month after that. Take your career to the next level with your own Puck's Hub website today.
Dan Bublitz Comedy Productions.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to an all-new Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs, where Josh and I call back the most recent episode, and this week we are recalling episode 283 with Kira Magcalen, and it was a great conversation. It was a fun conversation. I was glad that we were able to have that conversation. We actually had to reschedule a couple times, but we got it nailed down.
Yeah.
Got it in the books, on the docket, in the bank, out to your earwaves.
Hot off the press. What did we miss? Ready for consumption? Hot out of the oven?
Right out of the microwave?
That's where stuff's going to come from tonight, man.
One of them nights tonight, huh?
Yeah, it's a blockbuster night at my house.
Blockbuster night. Movie night means cook in the microwave.
That's right. Yeah, I just realized a lot of our listeners are not going to know what making it a blockbuster night really is.
I know, right? Oh, you got to be a certain age to understand that reference.
You know what? We'll wait right here while you guys look that up. Here we go. Okay.
And while you're looking that up, this is a good opportunity to go back and listen to episode 283 with Kira if you haven't already.
That's right.
All right. Now that you looked up to find out what it means to have a blockbuster night, and hopefully you went and listened to the episode with Kira, you're all caught up to speed, and we can proceed.
We are hot off the press.
We can keep these wheels turning.
Oh man, a lot of stuff in this episode. I appreciated that, like, yes, she's a comic. She does stand-up comedy, had stories that apply to stand-up comedy, but she's seeing it through the lens of a graphic artist. So we've talked a number of times about how, you want that adjacent kind of, like you got to use your creativity in different ways to make it as a stand-up comic. And she's literally doing that. And her deal is a few episodes ago, we had somebody who was in a similar kind of lifestyle, but in her world, she's got a webcomic coming out, and she's really pouring herself into the graphic side of things. And so just a little bit different.
It is, absolutely. And it's cool because while it's outside, it's not stand-up comedy. It's still comedy adjacent, because a lot of what, like, her web comic that she puts out on a regular basis is her taking stand-up and humor and putting it into those web comics.
Yeah. So I totally have a lot of appreciation.
Yeah, it's a good tool. That's all I was gonna say for keeping the writing skills sharp.
Yeah. Right. Like in my teaching and stuff, I use a lot of my stand-up comedy. So it's not like when I spend time working on a joke and working it out, it's not like, there's gonna be equity in doing that. And
Yeah.
so that's why I had a special appreciation for what you just said.
Now, it's interesting that you talk about using comedy to teach because, in this episode, we talk a little bit about that. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about is how, like you said, you can use comedy when you're teaching things, but it's hard to teach and preach while doing comedy.
Yes.
The opposite of that is it's an interesting how there's two different sides of that. How
Right.
comedy
It's
can be
interesting.
used. It is very interesting. It's very
Like
intriguing.
So what is your take? So let's put a magnifying glass on comedy and why suddenly audiences are not okay when we start to preach or teach. This comes up in the episode, and I wanted to start here because our listeners have heard that already. So what's your take on that? Why does that happen? Why does that bring the room to a grinding halt?
I think because, honestly, I think a lot of it is because when people come to a comedy show, they're coming to forget about they're coming to free themselves from their lives and real life, and it's an escape. And when you start preaching or trying to teach something, you're making them, most of the time those topics are topics that everybody knows about. So it has the opposite effect. They're not forgetting about life. They're being reminded of it. And they're coming
Wow. Yeah.
here to, forget about that for a little bit. They just want to be entertained. They don't want, to have a lesson. And I think it is possible to, especially when you talk about like social commentary and things like that, where there's a way of having a lesson within the joke and kind of teaching. But I think you have to have a really strong skill set. I mean, Carlin was great at that. He was very good at pointing out
Correct.
things with social commentary and making observations, and it still be humorous. But a lot of times, if you go back and watch his stuff, you're gonna see that he didn't necessarily, like when he made points and stuff, might not have got laughter, but it was getting clapter. And that's something I picked up from the Daily Comedy Podcast, how he differentiates that is where you tell a joke, people laugh, you make a statement that people get behind, and you get that clapter where it's an applause, not because it was necessarily funny, but whatever you said resonated.
Yeah. And with Carlin, I think he's another example of something else we've done in one of these callbacks, which is you can't do what the greats do or what well-known comics can get away with. It's different. And I think a lot of people fall into the trap of breaking the expected sort of tacit or verbal contract that people expect when they show up to a comedy show, and then suddenly there's a lesson, or I love how you said it, like it reminds them of life when they thought that wasn't going to happen, and you're doing it because you saw Carlin do it on your favorite special that he does. There's other comics that do that too, Louis C.K. and Chappelle. Like there's social commentary that's part of what they do, but if you go back and watch the early stuff, there's probably not nearly as much of that there, as they're emerging, just like all of us, we kind of have to stay in that the boundary of the contract.
Yep. Oh, and we've talked about this before as well. I think also it's important that before you can really get into that, you need to build likability. It's just like anything. It's just like going blue, or saying something, that has shock value before an audience is going to get behind it or, at least be open to listening to it. They need to know that, they need to trust you. They need to have that likability, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you can't establish likability when you're, going straight into this is the lesson that I want you to know. But when you were delivering this topic, like you mentioned something that I think's pretty important, which is when it's the other way around, it's totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah, when you take any other topic that you're trying to teach and then you make it funny and entertaining, chances are, too, the people who are supposed to be receiving the information are going to be more they're going to better receive that information.
Yeah. Right. Like I've been kind of thinking about something a lot recently, which is, you know, who needs me more? Like where am I going to make the bigger impact? Like I have this kind of duality where I do comedy, but I also do teaching and a lot of corporate stuff. And so I've been like in episode intros when we talk about what we got going on, I'm a lot more quiet over the last few months because I've been doing these corporate talks and gigs and things like that. Because my question is, well, who needs me more? And it may be that the corporate folks do. The corporate folks need me more. And that's really where I can make a bigger impact. And, bringing comedy and some enjoyment into a workplace or a workplace dialogue, I feel like that gives me more freedom as a performer and as a person to teach, which is something that I like to do, but also have the comedy angle to it to make what I'm teaching more powerful. And I couldn't do it the other way around. That's, I don't know. It's an interesting, I'm just realizing right now that can't toe the line both ways.
Yeah, it is. It's very intriguing. And I can tell just from experience, the teachers that I had growing up, the ones that were more impactful to me and were the ones that were funny and entertaining and made the lessons fun,
Right. Because when you tell a joke, like there's like, as a comic, Dan, like if your joke falls flat and nobody laughs and you're bombing,
I never tell jokes that's
never
flat.
happened to you before. if some other comic were to do that, then
I am a pro, Josh.
You are an expert at all levels. So if a joke falls flat, no one's laughing at a joke, it's not personal. It's not that they don't like you. It's that they don't understand.
Yep.
They don't understand the premise. So laughter is the ultimate confirmation of listening and connecting to people. And I think if you're teaching and you're able to insert jokes and entertainment and amusement into what you're doing and people are laughing at it, then your message, your teaching message is just contained inside of that loop. Mm-hmm. And people are confirming that the message is landing on them and it's having an impact on them. And where you can totally give a talk about, whatever your profession is and go in and people can learn something and never laugh at it either. But there's no real confirmation for you, the speaker, that's happening without using laughter.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point. And that was well said. It really was. Well said. And another thing that we're going to talk about, I think that's good for that. That's a good way to close that topic, that talking point. I don't know that I could add anything to what you already said, but we also wanted to talk about how we push ourselves to get better. And that's, as performers, as people, humans, the whole 9 yards. What are things you do to push yourself? Especially now you're in this corporate world, you're teaching, you're adding humor to get better at teaching and using those methods. What are some other things you do to push yourself?
Well, I think the first place to look is like, am I being limited by any of the beliefs that I have? Mm-hmm. Am I holding myself back because I don't think I could do this thing if I tried? So I think the first place to look, for how to push yourself is to challenge those beliefs and ideas. Like, am I not doing this because I lack the skill? Am I not telling this joke because I lack the skill? Or doing crowd work? I think that's probably a good example for a lot of our listeners. Like, am I not trying crowd work because I don't know how to do it or because I'm scared? Mm-hmm. Or because I tell myself over and over again, I'm not a crowd work comic.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. How important do you think crowd work is? Especially if you're a newer comedian. The reason I bring this up, this is a good transition into this, but I had this conversation with a comic that's only a couple years in on a way to a show last
Yeah.
week that we were talking about this. And, one of the points that I was trying to make is, a lot of the crowd work that people do that, they'll claim to be good at crowd work, but they're, I'm sorry, if you're asking the same three questions that every other comic is asking,
Yeah.
what do you do for a living? What's your name? What's that? Like, that's not great crowd work. I mean, that's just my opinion. If you're a comic listening and that's your idea of great crowd work, I guess, good for you. I guess that's your prerogative. I will die on my hill.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also recommend, because I recommended this to that comic too, if you really truly want to do crowd work and be that crowd work comic, go watch some comics who are really good at crowd work. One that I would recommend is Russell Hicks. Phenomenal comic, started in San Diego, moved to the UK. Just his crowd work it's unmatched, really. It's
Yeah.
insane. But what do you think?
Well, I think a comic on your level, somebody who's headlining places, I think it's up to you to choose what you do and how to you're in charge of entertaining the room, and if crowd work's a strength that you can lean on and that you like doing it, do it. But
Mm-hmm.
in terms of a new comic, I think it's very important as long as you recognize the proper definition of crowd work. I think what you're saying, you're describing these same rote questions that I asked the same audience over and over again, or even worse, that the audience in front of me has already been asked several times in the night. To me, that's the opposite of crowd work. Good crowd work is living in the moment. Like if if like somebody asked the same guy who does roofing for a living and they make roofing jokes all night, and then I come up and say, I bet you're tired of these roofing jokes. Who else is tired of like this guy's roofing life? I'm getting bored. Maybe that's kind of an example of like breaking the pattern of
Mm-hmm.
what's been happening because you heard it in the room. Like some of the best moments I've ever had crowd work wise have all been in response to what's going on around me because the audience also sees it. And there's no way to script it. And I think that's why a lot of comics are afraid of it or tell themselves that they're not really crowd work comics so that they don't have to do it, so that they don't get better at it because they're not good crowd work, like this loop.
Yeah. Well,
This
yeah, I
belief
would
loop.
probably be in that. I don't think I'm good at crowd work, but I also, to me, I don't care because I'm not trying to be a crowd work comedian. That's why I
Yeah.
write and polish my material. I'm coming to want to do that. Sure, if things happen in the moment, I
Yeah.
try to be present and go with it, but I'm not intentionally going out of my way to do crowd work. And I think I think that's a skill set that every comic should have. You should be able to handle crowds and be in the moment and things like that. And, crowd work definitely helps you with handling hecklers and things like that. But I also think when you're early on in comedy, unless you've had experience in improv prior to this, you need to know how to write a joke and work on your joke structure and having solid material before you worry about being a good crowd work comedian.
Yeah.
But I think you made a great point about that what people think is crowd work is the opposite. And that's I think spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna develop as a comic, but I think this is the total crux of what we're talking about, which is you have to explore these areas to know if it can add something to your act. You've been doing this long
Absolutely.
enough to where you've explored it enough and gone, I don't necessarily enjoy crowd work that much.
Yep.
I got it if I need it,
Yep.
but I don't really enjoy it that much. So I don't do it.
Yeah. And
Right.
I've tried I've tried all kinds I've done very experimental comedy. I've tried all kinds of things to see what fit, what I liked, what I didn't like. A lot of it was terrible, didn't stick. I tried musical comedy. I'm not a musician. I've had some poetry, like funny poetry that I tried, and that some of that went fine. But yeah, all in all, you're right. You just have to work on, what works for you and follow that through.
Right.
And
Right.
that's a good way to push yourself to evolve is trial and error.
Yeah.
That's a great, just try some things. And if it doesn't work, no big deal, no harm, no foul, as long as you do it in a low stakes scenario. Like if I'm
Yeah.
going to experiment with something new that could totally bomb, I'm probably not going to do it at a sold out show where I'm getting paid money to be there.
Exactly.
I'm probably going to go try this at an open mic where nobody's paying attention anyway.
Right. Or where you are in the order of a sold out show, right? So if you're featuring
Oh,
or
that's a good
headlining
point.
a sold out show, you're going to bring the pain. You're going to bring the good stuff. But
Mhm.
if you got a 5-minute set and it's a guest spot and you're passing through, now let's make sure that it's a good show and it's funny, but you can take some risks in that spot. And it's not that bad if you do, because, you want the show to build and for the acts to get better as you go.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm always trying to improve. I'm a huge believer in continuous improvement. Anybody that listens to this podcast and has listened to this podcast for a long time, you
Yeah.
already know that we've been continually working to improve this podcast over the years. It's evolved tremendously. I have that same aspect in my personal life, my professional life, comedy, always trying to push to be better. And some of the things that, one of the things I'm trying to get better about is, writing, getting better writing structure. I need to, I've been working on thinking of ideas of how to, to sit down and actually hash out jokes. Like I'm good at thinking about ideas and working it out in my head, but I'm trying to get to where I'm actually, hey, I'm going to sit down, do the thing, and actually, put the work in. One of the ways that I've done that, started to do that is, with that, I know it's 3 weeks in a row, but the gig diary, I can't stop raving about it because it's a good incentive to get me to try to write things and pay closer attention to my sets when I perform,
Mm-hmm. Great.
where
Yeah.
I wasn't, paying as close attention as I should have been, but I am now. So,
Yep.
That's one thing that I've been doing for that to try to get better.
That's a great ingredient for growth. You can accelerate your ability to grow at anything as long as if you've got the professional humility to sit
Mm-hmm.
through a recording of you messing up or being
Yep.
willing to revisit that.
Yep.
Big
Well, and I
time.
think it's important too, when you're thinking about what you need to grow and evolve as a performer or, in anything, finding the right tools that work for you too. I want to point that out there. Yeah, I'm raving about this gig diary. Wendy is a good friend of mine, but I actually, she put out a really good tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's very useful. I find it very useful. You listening, you might not, and that's fine. But maybe you have something else that works better for you, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you find a tool that works for you, make sure you're utilizing it. Utilize all the tools that you can if it's going to help make you better and evolve as a performer and a
That's right.
writer.
I think we covered a lot here, Dan.
Yeah, we did. I just want to do just a couple quick things with that. Ways that you can improve your writing using daily writing prompts.
Yeah.
Spend 5-10 minutes a day writing. Use a writing prompt. Listening back to your sets, taking notes on your sets. Develop your own rating your rating system for your jokes when you listen back. Maybe it's a 1 through 5 score based on the laughter. You know, we've got plenty of episodes. If you go back into the vault, there's plenty of episodes of us talking about different methods for using data to improve and things like that when you listen back to your set. So yeah, use all the tools that you can, and yeah, let's keep getting better together,
That's
baby.
right, folks.
All
Every
right.
day.
Every day we getting better. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Between Moms Callbacks. We'll be back next week with another fantastic episode. Our guest next week is Mandy Kay, a fantastic comedian from Denver, Colorado. So, yeah, keep listening and have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production. Raw.